All right, welcome back to everybody for this week's discussion. So we're discussing pages 79 to 93, and for those of you who are just watching this video on YouTube, we are doing this series of just discussing this book. The book is Bhagavad-Gita, New Translation by Georg Feuerstein, and we are taking each week we are just discussing different sections of the book, and we're sequentially proceeding to a point of completion. And we've had a very good time so far. So I think I was going to read more than this just because of the fact that it seemed like very little content, whatever we selected. Um, and but I didn't have the time actually. I was busy with like some conferences and stuff, so I couldn't read more than what we had assigned. So I just read until chapter one exactly to the point where we were supposed to finish. And so before we dig in further with the details and questions or something like that, maybe we can go with the first impressions. Because I think Avantika, like you hadn't read some of the pages up until chapter one in the last time. So maybe we can also discuss some of those earlier things that we didn't get the chance to read last time. But yeah, do share general impressions.
I would like to share a general impression about the chapter one, Raghav.
Hmm.
So, um, okay, since that I've read chapter two as well, maybe I'll do a comparison. In chapter one, I found that it's not clearly distinguished like which verse is being said by which speaker between Arjuna and Krishna. I picked up another version of Gita to improve my understanding, and I felt that that approach I felt more satisfied with to get more clarity while I'm reading through. And just because of this issue, I moved on to chapter 2 and I found that it's little better there and they clearly say that which verse is being spoken by whom.
Okay, that's interesting. I do have something to say about this. See, I I from whatever I read in chapter one, most of it was just like Arjuna speaking, and also like it did have a like specification as to like who was speaking the following lines. It starts off with like on the left side there is an indication as to who the speaker is, and whatever follows after that is being spoken by that person. And I think there were a few, only like a few characters. I don't think there was a lot that was said by Krishna. So it was just mostly Arjuna, like, expressing his psychological state regarding the whole situation.
Actually, there are four characters here actually.
Yeah,
So it's a dialogue happening between Arjuna and Krishna, and then Sanjaya reporting to Dhritarashtra. So
exactly. Yeah,
whatever, so the so instead of saying what Krishna said, I think the author is saying that what Sanjaya said to Dhritarashtra, right?
exactly. Yeah, there's a meta aspect to this.
Yeah.
The whole conversation between Arjuna and Krishna is being narrated to, from the. I mean, I honestly like the names are like I can't really pronounce it easily. I haven't paid attention to the actual pronunciation, so I just remember it as like the minister to the blind king. He's he's just like
Yeah.
I guess like just like reporting
I
and
think even
yeah.
even he was assigned a status where no one will kill him, something like that. If I'm not wrong, this is not from the book. This is
Mhm.
from my remember that I remembered from somewhere that this Sanjaya will not be harmed by the other how do you say
Yes,
from by Pandavas.
No, it was mentioned in the book.
it was
That
more
was
like
okay.
an abhay dan. It's like if Sanjay is one-on-one reporting, it might
Yeah,
anger Dhritarashtra, right? So Dhritarashtra might harm him. So he'll not be killed by was more like a abhay dan.
yeah.
Mm. But Sandeep, what did you think about the clarity of the speaker? Like, did you feel the same way that Avantika felt, or were you okay with it?
See, I was telling you that I was listening to a Sanskrit version, right? So it
Hmm.
is actually a Sanskrit from Telugu, right? So they say it in Sanskrit and then they say it in Telugu. I found it a bit, again, uh, biased or like bhakti type of.
Okay.
But then when I read this book, initially, first I read this book and then I listened to the uh, on Spotify about Bhagavad-Gita, and then I read it the second time, and then I understood it's very. I find that book very useful when I compare to any other way of listening. There is a lot. There is a lot of uh, depth to it. I did written down some questions. I'll talk about it more. But I found it very useful as far as the book is concerned. I'm not actually confused. I find it very fascinating that author was able to give all the uh, the nuances that are missing in almost every book that we have come
Yes.
across recently. So I'm very glad that we are reading this book.
Yeah, actually, I felt the same way multiple times. Up until the chapter one, when we were reading, there was like so much like context and like preparation that was done to the details and the accuracy and all the other things. Like not just like about how he's gonna approach it, but also he did like a detailed breakdown of the various approaches that exist. Like at a
Yeah.
historical overview of like how many different approaches there have been in the spreading of the Gita. Like because like he
Yes.
talks about like how it started off as like a very closed off thing where only certain elites were allowed to actually know about this. And then he talks about like how when it started actually spreading into the mainstream, and when the first English translation happened, and first the entry into Europe or like other regions happened. And he talks about like the different three different approaches he talks about. One is um I think the spiritual one, and then the one is a literal and the philological one that he talks about. The second is I guess, the spiritual aspect of spiritual approach of like trying to get the spiritual essence of the Gita and convey that. And the third is the poetic approach, where they're trying to encapsulate the poetic nature of the Gita. And he talks about like how each of it is like flawed in a way. um, and he talks about like his own approach. I think he takes this like very literal approach where he's trying to preserve the original intention behind the words and making sure that his approach to translation is very consistent so that like we can understand the original text in its actual depth. So this this is actually the kind of like intellectual treatment that I would be really happy. I mean, I'm really happy to receive, because it really like lets you be in charge of how you interpret things, instead of like somebody like making you sit in this, like it's almost like the analogy that I think of when it comes to like other translations that are like more bhakti oriented, is that you're sitting in the passenger seat and that person is driving, and you're
Yeah.
watching through the window. So you have no choice. You're just like a passive person, like just like meandering through things. But here, you know with this translation, it's more like he's giving you he's giving you like a tour guide kind of a thing, where he's giving you all the different things, and then like you can basically choose how you approach it, or at least like how you interpret what you see. And
Yeah.
that is
Even there is.
that is yeah
Yeah. Continue.
that is a I feel like that is a very respectful treatment. As a reader, like you get
Yes.
the choice of like how to interpret all these things, and you're very informed before you even start. And I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, so the ninth chapter in part one, right? So it's all about he's trying to put all cards out there and make the reader understand what the approach he's taking on translating Gita. And I think there is also one of the
No spoilers.
instances I found. No, not spoilers. The chapter one, part two. We all read it, right?
No, but you
So
said chapter 9, right, before?
no, part one, chapter nine. The on
Oh, okay.
translating the Bhagavad Gita.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. Part one. I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last chapter of the part one. So
Hmm.
he's explaining everything like he's putting all the cards out there, right, to understand the
Yeah.
listeners, to make the listeners, sorry, the readers to understand what is the approach he has taken. And it actually reflects a lot in chapter one of part two, Bhagavad Gita.
Hmm.
And when he describes what is Varna, right? So there is a lot of uh, you know hatred towards a lot of like I mean, see whatever the book has written at that time, whatever happened, I think there is a serious mistranslation of understanding what the context and the society and the language it meant. You know, it is like
Yeah.
watching a Chinese movie with English subtitles, which I never liked. So it is like whenever you want to try to watch a other language movie, there is a lot of linguistics go into the things like there are a lot of words that actually make a lot of context into the culture and the language and the life of the people. So you cannot actually translate that exact thing into your own language.
Yeah.
So I feel that English is English. We all speak English, and then that is the way the things are. But again, sorry. So the author did a good job in trying to bridge this gap as much as possible, and at least as an Indian, I'm able to understand what is the context because we already have some melodramatic history of what it is. So yeah,
Yeah.
May I please add to Sandeep?
Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
yes,
In the same context, but not from this book, in other discussions, what I have heard is like you guys must be knowing that Chanakya, he put Chandragupta Maurya onto the throne after fighting and creating all the politics and all those things. So he was not a Kshatriya. So in our ancient India, the caste was not understood in a way like it's very hard and fast demarcation. Sorry, not caste, the varnas. It was more according to the role. Some people or some text, this is I'm quoting from one of my discussions in another book club. So they say that when Britishers came to India, they could totally not comprehend what is going on in Indian culture and society because there is no parallel of it in the Western cultures and the societies. So they did not understand the Varna system at all, and since then it got corrupted a lot by demarcating it very strictly with the birth and all those things. So I wanted to add one context.
Yeah. Even I was thinking that, see, a lot of these things are when first things are interpreted, right? Like it is also the limitations of the interpreter that goes into the outcome of that interpretation. So, for example, even if you take a modern context where, let's say that I am going and meeting a person for the first time. Let's just take a personal context, right? I'm going and meeting a person, and this person has a very different way of operating. Let's say that I think of, like, professionalism as being somebody coming to a meeting on time, and they are communicating properly. They're communicating explicitly and clearly. That's like all things about professionalism. And let's say somebody else is, like, used to this kind of like a culture of, like, coming late, 15-20 minutes late to a meeting, or they don't explicitly communicate things. They just like assume that you also know, or other things like this. My first impression is that this person is deliberately being disrespectful to me. But that may not be the case. It's just that that person is used to a different way of operating, and everybody has been okay with it, so they think it's okay. They're not trying to offend, deliberately, but it comes across like that for the first time interpreter, for the first time, first as a first impression. So it takes a certain while of, like, going back and forth, that to actually understand their actual intentions, and the fact that they are not really like trying to disrespect you, but it's just coming across, because like they're coming across that way because both people are used to different ways of operating. And this happens all the time, even when you're going, let's say you're going to Japan or something. In Japan, like, people, it's a professional courtesy to not make eye contact when you're talking to people. If you make eye contact as you're talking to somebody, it's very rude. culturally.
Wow.
And and also like when you give a visiting card to somebody, you have to give it with both hands. And if you're receiving somebody's visiting card with both hands and you just keep it on the side, that's disrespectful. You have to look at the visiting card, like, at least for a few moments, to indicate that you are acknowledging their title, their position, and you're understanding it, and you have to keep it inside your pocket or your wallet. If you keep it on the table, it's like a mark of disrespect. So these are cultural things that when you first encounter a new culture, like you are not aware of, and it takes a long time to do that, to actually get to that context. And I'm talking about this from an individual perspective. But when it comes to like a entire civilizational interaction, right? So the English came to India, and that was a civilizational interaction for the first time. And these things take a much longer span of time to actually get to a point of like a equilibrium, where the impressions are actually reflecting the deeper reality of the other side. So I think when the English first came, and or any other civilization first encountered the Bhagavad Gita for the first time, they obviously like interpreted through their own lens, the color of their own lens. So it I think that was like surveyed properly, like, well, it was addressed properly in the chapter 9 of part 1, where he's talking about, like, the earliest impressions were like this. He's giving you examples of like the various interpretations that sort of like use the Christian interpretation to I guess like transmit the message, because like anybody, right, like you use what you know to understand what you don't know.
Yeah.
When you encounter something completely novel, completely foreign, you'll try to, like, analogize it with what you already know, so that like it conveys properly, because like otherwise it's going to become very terse and very dry. People will not really get it. So it's understandable that the earliest versions of like Gita interpretations were like, tinted by their own biases and their own, like, the classism in their own societies and all this. The interesting thing, I mean, I do see like a inconsistency in that, like when he's talking about varna especially, and how he's talking about like varna translates to the word color, and it was not necessarily, um, it was more of a social class thing rather than any kind of like a racial or a genetic thing or whatever. But one thing I do find as a contradiction is that, like, we know about in Mahabharata, like, Karna was prohibited from certain things because of his low birth or something, right? So I do see the merit to the argument that Varna is related to your birth because of the examples like that. What do you guys think about that?
So,
Yeah, Sandeep, go ahead. I'll go next.
yeah. So I just wanted to address what Avantika said about the Britishers exploiting the caste system. It is partly true. They no, exaggerated and magnified the issue, but the issue has already existed even centuries before. That upper caste, like Brahmins and other castes, have taken advantage of this so-called varnas for centuries. Even before that, Britishers only had to add fuel to the fire, and they took it to a very divide and rule kind of thing. And
They were like, just use whatever division is
yeah,
visible, just exploit that.
yeah, exactly. Even between India and Pakistan, which didn't exist without British, right? Without British, Pakistan wouldn't exist. So as simple as it is.
I,
So yeah. So as for what about Raghav said about uh, Karna, right? If I'm not wrong, I'm very poor at remembering all these names. So he was born lower caste, something like that, and I think even maybe there is like if you take the timeline of the Vedas, right? So there might be some kind of dilution of what actually the Varnas are, even to the point where Bhagavad Gita was recorded. So I would say it is like more prevalent that okay, once you're born, you're put through a system, and then that system will decide what your varna is. That is my second-hand knowledge that I heard somewhere. Maybe I'm wrong, but that is what I understood from what it actually might have been. I don't have any solid data on it. And yeah, so to address Raghav's question, I think even the Varna system is not as it was meant to be initially. Even it could have been diluted even to the point of recording Bhagavad-Gita.
I do see like a potential for. By the way, Avantika, did you have anything more to add or?
Yes, I
Okay,
do.
go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, I think I have 3 points to add. 3 points to add. Sandeep, I read in yet another book, and it's not a spiritual book at all. So they were analyzing that even after partitions, so like some Muslims stayed back in India, there were some Hindus who stayed back in Pakistan, and the majority of the people who stayed back in Pakistan were Dalits. Okay, and even they are mistreated by Muslims on the same lines of like you are Dalit, you are restricted to this, that, and all those treatment, which became kind of culture of the land, unfortunately. Okay, I mean, I just it was like for your information kind of thing, which I read somewhere. But to the Raghav's point, I want to add like Karna was born low and he was not being allowed. If we talk about the context in which we read this particular thing in the book, so it was like one contest kind of thing was happening between all Kauravas and Pandavas, and they were trying to find and designate the one who is the best. So we have got a good context in this book that there was an all-time rivalry and a lot of jealousy between Pandavas and Kauravas. It was like it is not just black and white, but it was coming out of lot of jealousy. And at that instance, instantaneously, I don't remember it was Duryodhan or Dhritarashtra. They said that okay, I make Karna a king of some XYZ land, so now he is also a king and he can also fight. So, with that example, we do see that it was not hard coded with the birth. So, as soon as I designate him as a king of some place, so he is also a Kshatriya and he is also a worthy contestant in this particular contest that we are having. So, I wanted to just add that. And
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I'll give you another example that's like contradictory to this one. Like, so Karna had like a teacher. I don't remember the names or anything, but he's a Brahmin. Okay, and
Mhm.
he only like or I don't know if he was Brahmin or Kshatriya or whatever, but he's being deceived into thinking that Karna is also that same caste or something.
Mhm.
And that's how he gains all the training that he gets early on. So he
Mhm.
infiltrates and he deceives and he sort of like gets all the training and eventually he comes to know that he's not a Brahmin. Okay, yeah, it is about Brahmin because like um so
Kshatriya, Raghav Kshatriya. Brahmins were teaching to Kshatriyas.
okay,
The king's rulers were the Kshatriya class. The
okay.
Brahmins were the scholar class.
Because in the story that I heard, I mean maybe I'm misremembering things, but okay, so they both go to the forest or to hunt or something,
Mhm.
and the teacher is like falling asleep on Karna's lap, and there is some animal that comes and bites Karna's legs, but he knows that if he moves, he's gonna wake up his teacher, so he just like sits there and let that wound happen. And when the teacher finally wakes up and he sees that Karna did this, he realizes that you cannot be doing this if you are a Brahmin. There must be you must have lied to me or something. That's how he finds out. This I don't know if this is true or not, but this is the story that I've heard.
Sorry to interrupt you, Raghav,
Mm.
what he cannot do, he cannot let it bite.
No, if you are a Brahmin, you would not be able to tolerate this. You would have immediately reacted. But because of because you have a certain tolerance, it must mean that you are not a Brahmin or something. I don't know. This is a long time ago that I heard this story, and I kind of like remember it being like very fascinating. But I may be misremembering the details. Um, but I do remember that he basically lied about his caste to get that training. We may have to like do a little bit of research as to like what exactly the story was. But yeah, this was one of the things that reminded me. Okay, there is a strict distinction or like a strict genetic basis even maybe to this you know distinction between different castes. But again,
Mm.
I like I said, it's been so long that maybe this is not as informative. But I just wanted to like share what I remember in case like it is something that you guys can correct if I was wrong, or if
I
you've already
don't
heard the story before.
I don't recall reading this, so I have no comments.
Not it is not related to the
Mhm.
Gita, but this is
No,
like more of
yeah,
Mahabharata. Yeah,
I understand, but like
yeah.
I don't have knowledge.
And by the way, like
Yeah.
we have a spectator like Ratna Sanjay, like he's joined for the first time, I think. Would you want to like quickly like I guess like share your interest in why you're in this call, Ratna? By the way, you're not audible. I'm not sure if it's a mic issue or if you're not speaking anything. It sounds like there's some mic issue. While he's fixing that, maybe Sandeep, you were going to say something?
Uh, yeah. So there is, yeah, I do remember the story on the same lines, but I don't
Hmm.
remember recalling. I don't recall he brought up Varnas into it. I do remember he gets angry on him. It's like I have like pieces of memory. I don't exactly remember the story.
Yeah.
And I want to bring in this. There is something on footnote on page 79 in the 96 of the PDF.
Hmm.
So twice born, right? So it is defining as twice born for all the three Varnas, and the class of Sudras is exempted from this privilege. Okay. So there are two sides to it. I would like to uh, uh, propose one side, which more like constructive way of looking at it. So let's say, what if all this is psychological, right? See, when you have a, let's say, when you have like a friend circle or a community, or let's say even if you're trying to recruit somebody, above their intellectual capability, you also look into their psychological ability to be team player, or able to vibe, have the same vibe of your team, what you're trying to do, right? So what if this twice born is about all this? I mean, I'm just trying to be more like out there, 100% optimistic about it, not trying to think what could go wrong, something like that, right? So what I'm trying to see from here is, what if they have, like, let's say all these people are put through some system, and then they are recognized as some sort of varnas, right? Let's say someone is born, and then they put through this Gurukula system, and then they are assigned a system to Brahman, right? And then this person goes and then tries to prove himself as Brahmin in the real world, and that is when he actually gets, that status of being born twice. Because once you're out of the Gurukula, and then you go into the real world, and then converse or participate in social activities and whatever the stuff going on at the time, and then you was able to get into that vibe and be a part of that community of those intellectuals, and then you're born the second time. And what if there are like some qualities that only make some people to be able to have that connection with all these other people, and then there are certain people who doesn't have that kind of a vibe, and they are being classified into Sudras, and they will not be probably given a chance to get into the real world, and then they cannot prove it themselves, or maybe they have to go through the cycle again. I'm just giving you, trying to put it black and white as much as possible that might be
Sandeep,
possible.
Sandeep, same thing has been put in text as well in the same book. If you all like, I can read it out.
Okay. Okay.
Page number 58 or 75 of the PDF. But the Brahmanas also have felt that the spiritual knowledge contained in the Vedas ought to be protected against corruption. They rightly fear
Yeah.
that the disclosure of essentially spiritual teachings to all and sundry would only lead to misinterpretation by those without adequate training, confusion, and abuse, as it does today with the easy availability of Vedas in paperback versions. And my commentary on it would be like, we did see this misinterpretations, if we can say, in our own group as well, Raghav, right? And that is when we said that only we can read and discuss and not just discuss simply.
Yeah, but that
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the caste or varna or whatever, right? It's more
Yes.
about like the training, and I don't see the relation between this and the other thing because this is like universal, right? Like I mean,
Mm.
I can say the same thing about like somebody coming to a quantum physics, like a conference and then saying something randomly without having studied or without having a PhD in the subject. So it's the same thing universally where like if you give something complex to somebody who's not adequately trained for it, they are going to corrupt it. They are going to like maybe like use it against themselves or against others. That kind of a thing always exists. But this I'm trying to synthesize what Sandeep was talking about in terms of the twice born and the kind of a test. I've never really had any kind of like a detailed insight on this kind of like a testing happening where they classify people into different varnas, kind of like it's a comical comparison, but like kind of like how they do it in Harry Potter, right? Like they use the hat to like figure out which house you belong to or something. I'm just imagining something like that being what Sandeep is talking about.
In
So
my
Yeah,
in my
something like that. Yeah.
community, that thread ceremony doesn't happen, and I don't belong to Shudra community as well. But when I joined the workforce and I got invitations, it's my son's thread ceremony and such invitations. That is the first time I understood all these things. So maybe in today's time, it has just become a ritual that there is a thread ceremony, and maybe in the early ancient times, like Sandeep mentioned, there was some like testing kind of, and only then that you were awarded with that thread. So I'm just trying to make some assumptions and hypotheses here.
see, there is another aspect to this which we haven't discussed, which is that there is a see if for example, let's say um, let's say you're living in a society and you are a Kshatriya. Now, if you want to have better Kshatriyas the next generation, you have to basically like have a mating preference for the kind of outcomes that would accentuate your Kshatriya lineage. So for somebody who is a proud Kshatriya and they take pride in their identity, they will want their children to be better Kshatriyas or like whatever. And similarly for like Brahmins, like they may want to like live a certain life that raises a better Brahmin. So maybe even if it in antiquity it may have started off as like a social class thing, but eventually there is a natural outcome is that like if you want to have like a better version of it, you need to basically have like mating preferences that keep that mating within the class or within the things because these things are um not just like as a matter of profession. These are things that are affected by genetics as well, especially for somebody who's trying to be a warrior. They need to basically have those genetic traits to be better warriors, or if you're going for intellectual capabilities, you need to make sure that your genetics favor that. So it could have started off at some point in antiquity as just the class thing, but eventually inevitably it has to translate into a system where it is preferentially treated for people who are like coming from a lineage of Kshatriyas are the true Kshatriyas, and you can't just randomly become. Um, but it does not also like exclude the possibility of like somebody who's born a Shudra could who could just become. a Kshatriya by pure talent, without even without the genetic backing, they could become like a good warrior. Right? That is possible. It's not like it's impossible. Um, but I guess eventually, when people forget the origins, they may just like artificially impose these things, saying that you cannot be because this is how it's been. Like even today, right? Like we see people reasoning by saying that this is how my great grandfather and my father and all the other people in my relatives are doing things, and therefore this is the right way to do it. They don't know the history of like what happened 5 generations ago. So they'll only like refer to their immediate ancestry to figure out what the traditions are. So even if like for a few generations the original and traditions are not emphasized in great depth, and the original essence of it is not maintained, right? It can get corrupted over a matter of few generations.
Yeah,
So
that is exactly the cause and effect of dharma and karma, right? So if you're not following dharma as a result, the generations followed by you, it is not like let's say somebody would be like cursing you, that some Kunti was cursing Krishna, because it's not like the curse is actually a practical thing. But once you do this kind of what is it, you miss your dharmic actions, it will drizzle down into the generation after that.
I can actually give one more example here. See, like in today's time, we don't know the reasoning. You guys must have heard about it. We women have lot of restrictions when we are in our periods. Okay, so it that has also evolved. It was at one point of time, women while menstruating, they were sent to an outhouse. They were not even living in the same house, and then after some time that was got rid of, but still we can't enter the kitchen, we can't do the puja. Then next some families went further ahead. Okay, fine, will not restrict to kitchen, we can enter the kitchen, but let's not do the puja, let's not go to the temples. And now in present day we keep on reading lot of reasonings. Okay, why is it not applicable to today's time? With what thoughts was this system introduced, and all everyone is giving their own reasonings and assumptions and hypotheses to it, but there is no clear mention so far that I have come across. And even I was in lot of dilemma last week whether to read Bhagavad Gita or not while I was in my periods last week. So finally, I made a decision for myself that okay, I'll be reading this as a book and I'm not worshipping it. It's just as a text philosophy for me. That is how I took it and I went ahead. So there, when we don't know the reasoning, sometimes we just take it as a rule and it doesn't mean anything more for us. And then it becomes a hard and fast thing because we don't have the reasoning.
yeah, I think originally most of these things might have been just practical reasoning, like because they probably didn't have these like hygiene products. I mean, this is probably I'm guessing this is one of the things that are coming out as assumptions and all these things, but they probably didn't have the hygiene products that would prevent a situation where everything seems okay. But now that we have it, and everything can be, I guess, like dealt with hygienically, then there is no concern. This need not be a thing anymore. But obviously, like you said, people have these like dogmatic like rules, like they'll have these like dogmas around um, what is to be done and what is not to be done. And the only solution to this is that people develop a certain sense of like critical thinking, because like there are two sides to this. One is like people who dogmatically believe um, certain rules and like certain things based on piety and all these things. On the other side, who completely outright reject everything because they see that inconsistency. They see that like superstitious nature to that thing. They will outright reject everything. This is the battle between like if you take in a certain different context, there are like the class of like people who identify as atheists, who hate astrology, who hate numerology, or who hate all of these, like anything related to anything that is not completely empirical and rational and not mainstream science, they reject outright without even digging into the details of it because they're just like averse to that way of like not having proper rationale. On the other side, like you have people believing literally anything that they hear. Uh, I think there needs to be a middle ground where people, like rationally and critically scrutinize anything before taking a stance. You instead of like taking the shortcut of like either this or that. It's kind of like left or right wing politics or this or that. It's a binary way of classifying things. I think when you study things, like in depth, only then you can actually form a reasonable opinion about things. So one of the examples regarding that whole period thing that you talked about, there was a time when people were not allowed to climb the mountains. Like women were not allowed to climb the mountains because you have these rules, right? Like that women of a certain age cannot um, climb in these like
Sabrimala.
padayatras or like these kind of like trips to holy places on top of mountains. The reasoning initially was that menstruating women will attract animals because like the blood will attract the animals and that is dangerous for them, so they were kept from pursuing these things. So they'll have to like reach either menopause or like they have to be before they start puberty, like reach puberty. They'll be able allowed to do this, but up during their entire womanhood, they will not be able to do these things because of those practical reasons. But because today, like it is not a concern. Like you can still be on your period and go somewhere without having a lot of like without attracting those animals or whatever. And so when you look at the reasoning critically, when you like pass on the rationales properly, it avoids these kind of like confusions. But there is an essential problem here that like not every generation can encapsulate the entire lineage of reasoning for anything to happen. So at some point, like things are cut off. Like you cannot like transmit the entire rationale of like 5 generations to the next generation because like if the next generation is also supposed to do that, they have to do this for 6 generations of reasoning. So they cannot transmit everything. So at some point, something's get cut off, and you may be doing a lot of like ritualistic things that you do not really understand, but you still anyway do because like you are used to it. You are used to the ancestral, like heritage of performing those things. So this whole generational degradation of like origins of a rationale, these things are inevitable, and especially for a country like India, which has like a very very like deep history, like continuous, is probably the oldest civilization with a continuous lineage going back to like thousands of years ago. And so when you have something like that, there's a lot of superstitions that arise out of things, and obviously there are like a lot of things that people don't understand. They just do it. I mean, that's probably my biggest complaint in the Indian society is that nobody really understands why they're doing anything. And
Ra- Sorry, sorry. No, no,
no,
please
just one more
continue.
point is that like, but there is like a class of people who reject everything, right? They completely switch to this like Western mindset and do things. But I think that more people need to be like on a reasonable thing. They have to question and figure out rather than just make assumptions and fall into these shortcuts, mental shortcuts of like either being completely rationalistic or completely dogmatic. But yeah, please go ahead. I mean,
Raghav, when you said na, that in India, so last week I was listening to one podcast
mhm,
where they have done a research study on atheism. So in
mhm,
Western world, atheism is a lot on rise, and they even compared it with the Asian thing. In Asia, definitely this is not on as much rise as it is in West, and because it is more dominated by Christians, so they are seeing more in number in Christianity. People are leaving Christianity. So they did mention that when they did a study on such people who have given up Christianity and now are atheists, so once they give up, they are not completely able to move away from it. They say that we don't believe in anything, but still somewhere they do have that fear. Okay, what if the concept of hell that they have, what if it is true somewhere, even minutest possible, with minutest possibility, and do get punished. So it's not just an Indian thing, probably it's just a mankind thing.
yeah. See, I think. uh, to give some context on the Christian thing, right? Like the reason why so many people are heavily attracted to atheism from like from Christianity, and I've also seen like Muslim people, like this is I'm talking about like my encounters in the U.S. Where like I've seen people coming from the Middle East, hardcore, like they've raised in this like very very strict societies like Saudi Arabia and all these other places. They come there and they, one of like there was a funny incident that I encountered. Well, not funny, but like fascinating. Um, there was this, like Muslim, almost like it was like a clergy level of like involvement in Islam, and he's like let's say 50 years old, and he came to the U.S. to start a pig farm. And if you know enough about like Islam, pigs are like haram.
Yeah.
They cannot like go near it, touch it, or they cannot eat it. So he was basically like farming pigs as a way of like defiance against Islam, and he was completely embracing Christianity, saying that Jesus is the Lord, Savior, and everything. So we've seen these kind of like transitions going to the polar opposites. So when you're raised in an extremely Orthodox Christian society with Christian values, there is a tendency when you reach a certain breaking point where your natural tendencies are so inhibited by this artificial imposition of the society, then what happens is that you tend to gravitate to the polar opposite. So for hardcore Christians, that would be atheism, a rejection of the presence of God. That is like very like very contentious thing in Christianity. And similarly for Muslims, going all the way to the other extreme, or like there are other examples as well. And the reason why you see such a huge rise in atheism in the West is because of the suppressive nature of their religious institutions historically. If you look at like several generations, like there's been a suppression of thought in itself, and that directly led to like this whole revolution, like Renaissance, like where they idolize thinking, because like thought has been suppressed for so long that they start to idolize thinking. Like for example, you had things like I think therefore I am, and all these other kind of like extreme ideologies surrounding intellectual thinking. So they start to celebrate the thing that they've been deprived of. And that's what happens, like whenever you have like a very very suppressive cultural construct, you'll have like the rise of things that are on the other side, the complete polar opposite. Now you don't see that happening in India because Indian religious institutions are not so suppressive. That's the reason why we have so many different variations or and polytheistic traditions and all these things. That's the reason why you don't have see any staunch atheists as well. Like you see that like small pockets of people, but not to the extent that exist in the West. So I think that's just my couple of 2 cents on this phenomenon. I think we've completely like taken a tangent on on this whole thing. I don't even know where we started off. That's kind
We
of
started out from Varnas.
yeah, but that is an indication of like how things happen over time, right? Like you start off with one thing and then it completely goes into a completely different direction. And when you're talking about the scale, a time scale of like human generations, you can't even have somebody reminding this is where it started off, because right so that's why like you need like a proper scholarship, proper preservation of history, proper, like for example, right now we are learning about the Gita through the work of one man, like doing this due diligence of like translating from proper things, and not just one man. It's like multiple people like taking up these scholastic endeavors to get us to this point where even though we are so far away from that antiquity of history that these things started off, we have a doorway to understanding what happened and how it led to where we are. So I think that needs to happen. I think especially with independent India now, like happening, I feel like it's time that we establish these kind of like serious scholastic, traditions where we approach with seriousness as to like what was the history, that has to like also translate to public perception of mainstream understanding as well, because I think that is missing in India. Like we're like children, like we don't really understand what's going on. We just do things because that's how my parents did it. That's how my grandparents did it. So I'm gonna do it. So a deeper rationale needs to be there. And yeah, again, I don't know how this relates to the present conversation about the book, but I'm actually glad that we're having these conversations as an outcome of our reading, because like that is what we need in society, is my impression. We need serious intellectual discussions that lead to a change in the narrative, so that like we can have more informed narrative.
Does anyone have anything else to say or
I do
discuss?
have like one point. I had a interesting point that we got to like the chapter 9, or actually maybe the one before that chapter. But basically, it was about talking about the different yugas. That in the time scale chapter, we were talking about different yugas. And what was it? I forget the names again, but it's like
Name
Treta
of
Yuga.
Satya Yuga, Treta, um,
Dwapar.
Dwapara, and Kali Yuga, right? Four. I
Yeah.
think is it four or is it five?
Yeah, four.
Only
Four,
four.
right? And it talks about like a degradation of consciousness and the cyclical nature of this whole thing. So you have like several thousand years of a certain era where like um asceticism is the way to spiritual progress, right? I think this is Satya Yuga, where you meditate and you gain um uh like the spiritual transcendences. And then you have a certain age where you have the ritualistic traditions that are like giving rise to those are the primary means of spiritual progress. And then you reach uh, I forget what the third one is, but then in Kali Yuga it is all about like karma. You have to do charitable endeavors to like do the spiritual progress, because so many people are suffering that the only way that you can gain spiritual progress is by helping others. So like this, there are like different eras of consciousness and different tools, devices for spiritual progress. And that was so fascinating for me, because it's indicating to this larger cycles that we talked about last time, right? Even though like even though we may think that okay, we have a linear mindset, right? When we think about it from a Western perspective of like what happened as evolution, we think of it as a linear thing. We started off in the caves, and then we become hunter gatherers, and then we become into agricultural civilizations, and then we started getting into more elaborate industrialization and all this. That's where we are now. So it's a linear progression that happens, indicating that no matter which time in the past you go to, you will never find the extent of civilization that we have now. But when you think about it from a cyclical thing, let's say that several 100,000 years ago, there was maybe like a like a civilization that was much more superior to anything that came after that, or at least to maybe like at least to the next 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 years later. It was the most advanced civilization because of the heightened consciousness of the society, right? So that part is super fascinating to me. I don't know if anybody else noticed that this indicates like a cyclical nature to the whole consciousness thing. Even though we are in the 21st century, maybe like I don't know which age we are in right now. A lot of people say that we are in Kali Yuga, but I think a lot of scholars like refute that we are probably in like Treta Yuga or something. Um, but for me, it's super fascinating because it it indicates that there might have been a past that was more advanced, and that might have been maybe like the some of the historical wonders were built during those times of like spiritual progression where we are not there yet. As a consciousness, we are not there yet where we we can understand what was the rationale behind certain things. For example, the Stonehenge could have been built at a time when the consciousness of society was like very high. Similarly, there are other like architectural wonders that have stood for several thousands of years, and maybe they were built during a time when the civilization was much more superior because of the heightened consciousness. So I don't know if anybody else had a deep reflection on those. yugas thing.
Not much to add here, Raghav, from my end.
I guess from the sound of it, it's like I guess not many people thought deeply about that part. But yeah, I found it really interesting, and I still don't know. Like, I don't know exactly what age are we in. Like, because people keep saying we're in Kali Yuga because things are so bad or something. But
In the book, it is mentioned that what you exactly mentioned that it could be uh, Dwapar Yuga or Kali Yuga. There are two instances mentioned in the book. I totally agree with what you have said that of stone age and other historical markers. It could have been cyclic, but I think probably the scale that we have right now have not existed in at least
yeah,
in consciousness might have been as a cyclic, ups and highs, but the size of the civilization that we have right now, I don't think don't have any evidence that it existed in this scale before.
hmm. Yeah, no, that's exactly the thing. Like when we look at like things like the Mahabharata, where like they had these like magical powers. The thing that really gives me the benefit of doubt that it could have actually been more literal than just mythological or like allegorical or like something like that is that maybe they were in a different heightened state of consciousness where they were able to harness more like subtler superpowers of human beings. Maybe they were in a heightened state of consciousness that led to them having um, like a greater um, what do you call it, like greater abilities that we are finding it inaccessible because we are at a lower state of consciousness in this era, right? So and we have to compensate in order to reach the same level of like abilities. We have to compensate through external abilities and through our ingenuity with materials outside of us. So our approach to reaching that level of like maybe superhuman capabilities, like flying or like telecommunicating. Maybe if in Satya Yuga, if you could, instead of using a telephone to communicate, you could just like sit and close your eyes and you could send out vibrations and the people were conscious enough to receive it and they can understand things. Maybe there was like a telecommunication of that scale happening at that time without the aid of these things. And if we manage to preserve these technological innovations and ingenuity until we reach Satya Yuga, then we would actually have more capabilities than what they had way in the past, just communicating, telecommunicating with their mind and vibrations. But the problem is that like you have to bypass like one layer of like Kali Yuga where everything deteriorates. And the nature of Kali Yuga is that like all civilization crumbles during this era because of the chaos and the instabilities and things. So whatever technological developments we are reaching now with all our iPhones and with our like internet enabled devices and VR and all these things, all of it will be completely lost during those 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years. And and it's completely reset again. And then you have to like restart from the beginning. And maybe that's how these things go. And every cycle you have like a marginal progression. So maybe the next time the Satya Yuga comes, we'll still have some remnants of whatever technological advancements we've had now, and that will make you evolve even further than the previous Satya Yuga. And that way, like humanity like evolves linearly in one sense, but also it's a cyclical thing. It's kind of like how things have like a wave and particle nature. And in a very large scale, you have like both the linear progression happening in a marginal thing every time the cycle resets, and also within that cycle, you have a cyclical nature of things. These kind of thoughts like really fascinate me a lot, and that was the reason why I was like very drawn to that particular segment, talking about how there's a cyclical aspect to this. And also another aspect to the cyclical nature is that the reason why we have cyclical nature to time is that we are revolving around the sun. the Earth is revolving around the sun. That's why we have like day and night happening, like, consequently, over and over. And we also have the year, every year happens with the one revolution. So imagine if the whole cyclical nature of the yugas, right? Maybe it's happening in a much, much, much larger physical, like movement of the galaxy. Maybe the entire galaxy is like revolving around something. And as we approach a certain source of consciousness, our consciousness is very, very heightened. And as we go further and further away from it, we reach to Kali Yuga, where there is complete darkness of consciousness. Maybe it's like the source of consciousness is like a sun in itself, and because of it, the brightness that we get from it, every form of life during the Satya Yuga is very heightened, like conscious in a heightened way. But as it goes further and further away from it, then there is a degradation that happens. And yeah, I mean, like that is the. I mean, this is not like completely original idea. I've heard this elsewhere, and I've ever been ever since I've been fascinated by this thing, because like it kind of like brings together this like mythological construct of yugas into a physical dimension that we can actually appreciate in a logical sense in the modern reality. I don't know if you guys heard of these you know these principles of like the yugas being like a physical movement of on a cosmic scale.
I've heard similar similarities, but not the exact ones. I think it's more of a astrophysics astrophysics point of view that everything started from nothing and everything will collapse into nothing. Something like that. That's a theory that is put behind the Big Bang theory, and we do have evidence that the universe is expanding. It's not a hypothesis. We do have convincing data that universe is expanding, and we do have some sort of evidence that everything started from nothing. So it's it's counterintuitive to be a physical human being and say that everything came from nothing. But we actually are at a point, not at a point, even if you just consciously think about it, at any time, you know, timeline of entire human history of if we can contemplate it, the consciousness would remain the same, right? I mean, the absolute consciousness. So, yeah, I'm not
But
exactly heard of this physical to
but
the
how
cyclic
do you
nature
know
of.
that the absolute consciousness is going to remain the same?
No, I'm not saying it would remain the same. I would say that if there is an absolute consciousness, if the perception of it might be incapable, we might be incapable of doing it. But if if we are hypothesizing that everything came from nothing, so consciousness comes from nothing as well, right? Or everything comes
See,
from consciousness.
even in this book, right, we've talked about the Brahma age and all this, right? Even the Brahma, like, he goes to the sleep, and then the entire world disappears, and then it's remade when
That
he.
was very new for me, Raghav. I never read that anywhere else.
Yeah, but you remember this text about like the Brahma sleeping and
Yeah,
then waking up.
yeah,
So
I remember.
and that is also a reset in a certain way, that the entire universe is destroyed and then like it is remade. So it kind of like correlates with this whole concept of like the universe emerging from nothing and then going back to nothing. Um, but what I'm talking about with the yugas is like in a much smaller time scale. Okay, here with the universe getting created and destroyed, that's like in the billion year time scale. But what I'm talking about is in the um, several thousand year time scales, where I'm thinking about like the Milky Way, like actually going around a certain axis, and it kind of goes closer to a source of consciousness. and consciousness is just like maybe like it's similar to temperature. Like let's imagine the analogy of temperature on Earth, right? Let's say that let's imagine the Earth going in an elliptical orbit around the sun. As it gets closer to the elliptical, the point of the axis where it is the closest to the sun, it'll be very warm, very hot. But as it goes to the other end, where it's going to the other end of the elliptical orbit, where it is farthest away from the sun, it is going to be very, very cold, right? So the warmth of the sun is not reaching that part of the axis of the orbit. Now, imagine something similar. Let's say there is a physical source of consciousness, and there is a elliptical orbit around this consciousness for the entire galaxy. Instead of the planet moving around the sun, you have the entire Milky Way galaxy moving around a certain axis. Imagine. Now, the closer we get to this source of consciousness is where Satya Yuga happens. And then the farther away you get from it, the source of consciousness diminishes, and the the experience of consciousness in the life form on this planet will go down tremendously, and that's when Kali Yuga happens. That there is a lot of like chaos and a lot of like absence of consciousness. People will not understand each other. People will fight each other. People will kill each other. There'll be a degradation of morality because consciousness is what keeps us from doing all these like degrading things. So if that like external source of consciousness is taken away, then these things go on the rise, and that kind of like a physical explanation kind of explains the cyclical nature of these yugas. So that was something that I was thinking about. I was reading that, and I will try to share some of the sources that I got that made me think about this, and I think maybe you'll also appreciate that. So I'll try to share that
So
in the
actually,
WhatsApp group.
yeah. So it's actually not true when the analogy that you gave about the Earth getting colder or hotter
Mm.
depending on the elliptical orbit. It is very negligible in astronomical terms, and the winter and
No, no, no.
summer we get because
No, no, no. I'm not talking. See, the Earth is
okay,
not going around the sun in a very elliptical orbit. I'm just giving you a hypothetical situation where there
okay,
is a star, and there is a planet around that hypothetical star that is going in an elliptical orbit. Okay, in that
okay,
case, see, imagine Pluto, right? I mean, there are other planets that are
yeah,
going around the sun in a very elliptical orbit. So
yeah,
there'll be like a great temperature variance that happens in a larger seasonal span.
yeah.
Okay, so that is what I'm talking about. You could have like a planet that is going around a star in such a way that like at maybe like a certain part of the orbit it's like complete ice. Everything disappears, and then as it gets closer and closer to that star, then you will
If
have like
you want more of a solid analogy, I can give you the quantum particle what is it? Quantum particles. I forgot I forgot the word. Quantum state, right? So if there are like two particles which are set on a state, and if you flip one particle and the other particle flips the direction.
you're talking about
So and
quantum
this,
entanglement.
yeah, sorry, quantum entanglement. Yes.
Yeah,
So these two particles are not communicating, right? Even if you put them galaxies apart, they would be recording the data. So if the consciousness is what is inherently uh, exists everywhere in the universe, so it could be possible that if the entire universe is centered to a certain point, and then it could it could have oh, the state of consciousness would theoretically could be explained in that way.
no, I don't get what you're saying because and also the thing is that we don't know the nature of consciousness, right? I mean, honestly, we don't even know the nature of life. We don't even know if life is a physical thing or if it's like a non-physical entity component to it. We were talking about this the other day in the philosophy channel, and consciousness is like much more of a unknown. thing. Like we don't exactly understand these things, and it's kind of like a wild speculation to be like talking about these things, to be honest. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, that's that's all we can do at this point.
yeah. But it is fascinating that we started off with the Bhagavad Gita thing, and then we're all the way talking about these things. But actually, that is like every time we do this, I think I'm feeling more and more convinced with the whole um, value of this whole exercise of discussing the Bhagavad Gita, because like we're talking about all these things, and I don't know what other book would give us this kind of a thing. And I'm hoping that we can explore more books as we go down the line to have these kind of like book-based discussions. I think
Yeah.
um, that is something that is missing in our society for sure. Actually, I don't know if
I
you guys know
also
this. I
can
don't
I
know if you
speak?
guys know this, but yeah, I don't know if you guys know this, but like in most Western societies, right? Like people read on average like 10 to 1,000 books per person. In India, it's like it's very very low.
Per person, per what time frame?
No, like in lifetime, I'm saying the average is
Mhm.
like between a 10 and 1,000, or something like that. But here, I feel like it's very very low. People don't really read enough in our society, and I think I want to change this with the whole book club initiative. If we can do this in a scalable way, that would be really something that I would love to see in our society. But yeah, like we need to like expand this whole whatever we started off with just the Bhagavad Gita reading, we should expand it into other books. So I'm looking forward to that. But Sandeep, you were going to say something?
yeah, I was saying that no, I'm amused by the detail in every word, like Kesava and Krishna having like I don't know, 1,000 names, and then
Mm.
it got me thinking, why would anybody need 1,000 names? And then and they don't use the same name every time, right? So it is so fascinating that the same person having 1,000 names, and all these names are being used
Yeah,
and
but I think it,
on a
it indicates to the
different
complexity of
context.
it indicates to the sort of like multifaceted nature of the person, right? Like so every quality is
Yeah,
being named.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
I want to talk about something in that, continuing with that, but taking a tangent. Did you notice that in the book, Krishna, like Lord Krishna, which we all know is given the name Krishna, other than that, Draupadi also was given the name Krishna. They added an extra A, and same thing, they said that because she was born dark. And somewhere in the book, even one okay, there were so many Vyasa, and Vyasa is more like a upadhi, sorry, designation rather than a specific name. That was a new knowledge to me. But one of the Vyasa was also called Krishna, was mentioned somewhere in the book. So at least three examples. People were named based on the complexion they were born with. So that made me think that we say na, that this racism, color based racism, is a lot of Western concept after this slave era, African slaves, and all those things. But reading this, and at some places, author also getting confused with varna with color. Somewhere it feels like this thing is not really very modern, and at least in India, it is there since long time. And the uh, people's preference for today with respect to complexion in even in marriage alliances, it is somewhere rooted deep. And do you have any more comments, any of you?
I don't think that is how it is, because the way we have been in our modern society, the skin color has been so much exaggerated. We are trying to understand the book in a way that with our own understanding that we have about color. But I seriously doubt it has anything to do with race. See, if just imagine whatever you know about racism in on modern world, just forget about it, and then think yourself you're you're born dark, and then people don't even think about your color. It's like you don't even have data what is white and what is dark, and you may have data, but you don't know that it is discriminatory. It is something is better than other. You don't even have that kind of a perception, and then you naturally call them. See, would you apply to the same thing when I say if the apple is red? I call an apple
Sorry,
instead of
apple.
calling
Okay.
apple. I would call it red, just like orange. It's orange color, but is it discriminating to call it orange? No, it's the fact that it is the color of the orange is orange, and the name itself actually the color actually came from the fruit, right? So I don't think there is any discrimination or associated with that. People are
Okay.
just giving the factual names of whatever. It's like calling a train a train. It's like, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, so you are saying that though they were named at that point of time, this preference or whatever we call in present day, that is a present day thing, not that ancestral thing.
Yeah.
No,
Mhm.
I think we are living in a time when racism is the highest. Like I think India especially is extremely a racist society right now. I know that racism exists in a lot of other societies, but I think nobody is more racist than Indian people against Indians themselves. Look at the amount of like women who are like uh, trying to like go with like a fair and lovely treatment and all this stuff. It's like I feel like we have this obsession over color of skin and everything when you're like that, everything you start to see everything in that light. And it's also
Yeah.
the case that like when the people who are the most race conscious are the ones who are also always crying racism. They'll see racism
Yeah.
everywhere.
Raghav, I so agree with you. I couldn't.
If it was true, let's say I'll give you a hypothetical. If racism was existed in the time of Bhagavad Gita, it would have been mentioned that people are trying to get darker or they're trying to get fairer. Nothing has mentioned anything like that as far as my knowledge is here. So,
Yeah.
Okay. May I go ahead with one last thing?
Mhm.
I just want to share. I read one of the verses and it made me feel uncomfortable. Later, I did realize that probably that was a first hand overreaction, but I just want to share with you all. On page number 89, 105 from PDF point of view, verse number 41 of chapter 1. So the translation says, though through the prevalence of lawlessness, O Krishna, the families women are corrupted. Once the women are defiled, descendant, O descendant of Vrishni, intermixing of classes occur. I mean, the way he has written, women are corrupted. Obviously, a lot of my overreactive senses got kicked in, and like, why is he blaming women just alone? But gradually, when I read, I do understand what he is saying. The focus is not on the word corruption, rather the intermixing.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess like the meaning of the word changes with. See, I think that's one of the things that we have to realize is that like we are always interpreting things from our subjective nature, and sometimes like you realizing that can actually give you a proper context about your own subjective nature, because we often tend to forget that we have our own biases, and we think that because we're oblivious to our subjective nature and biases, we just like ignore that. But to be conscious of that is a great exercise to actually get to know, okay, these are my colorings. This is the tint of the lenses that I'm wearing right now. So that needs to be there. You have to consciously understand your own biases, so that like you can see how that is reflected on your interpretation of situations. And I see this happen a lot, like especially when anything happens, there are different political factions even today, like that will color the situation a certain way without recognizing that that coloring happens through their
hey,
biases. Yeah, Sandeep, you're saying something?
sorry, I was in a railway station.
You don't know
So
what?
I'm in a railway station. I'm
Okay, okay.
just catch a train. So there was a kid. So I totally agree with you. It's very important. It's very crucial to understand that whatever the lenses you're wearing, you acknowledge it. You can wear it. maybe it is, even if you want to take it off, it's probably not that easy, the way we have been bombarded with all the news every day. So at least it is very a good habit of understanding your own biases and have a conscious uh, acknowledgement of it, so that you can see other things for what they are.
Yeah,
And
and I have to
yeah,
go soon. But I think we need to discuss like how we're gonna approach the next upcoming like session. What are we gonna choose for reading? I think that it would be fair to like maybe have like the next 5 chapters or something. What do
Five
you guys think?
chapters. Raghav, I was just about to say that going slow, I'm just enjoying a lot because it gives us more time to discuss things in depth rather than rushing through.
Okay, so let's reach I guess like a middle ground.
Sandeep.
What do you think,
yeah,
Sandeep?
I agree with Avantika. It's I'm not in a rush, and I'll be fine if it going to extend for next 18 weeks. That's fine.
No, I think we should. I do have like a certain urgency because like I wanna do more books. Like I wanna
Mhm.
do this in a matter of like a few months and then like finish it off. Like maybe like next 3 months is a good um thing. And actually, I'm joining from my phone, so I don't exactly have the PDF in my thing. So um,
And can I
yeah,
share
yeah,
my screen? I'm
yeah.
I've
You can
joined
share
with
your
it.
screen. Yeah,
Okay. Sharing is not turned on.
hold on. Let me do that.
So I think there are 18 chapters, even if you consider 12
One is
weeks.
done. One is done. So 17 is there.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's more
You
like
should be
a
able to
one and
share
a half
now.
chapter for every week. So we can go with two as a middle ground.
Uh, what is what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing the PDF, the
Okay.
highlighted portions.
Okay, great. So can we go to the
So can we do like a quick calculation of like how many pages are pending, and
so
then we'll
let's
maybe
say
like
we are
set a
at
goal.
92
Hmm.
and we'll read till 324.
No, no, no. Let's look at the total number of pages that exist.
Entire book,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
including part 3.
Yes.
Okay, 474.
474. And we are at 93. And we've only started like a month ago, right? But we had like some variations in the number of pages we've had to read each week. So how many pages from now until end? Can you calculate that?
Uh, okay, till 474 and we are at 92.
So that's roughly like 400 pages, give or take 400 pages.
Hmm. Hmm.
And let's try to like close Bhagavad Gita in like maybe so the we are approaching December, January, February, March. How about by February end we close it, and that is how many weeks is that? Um,
It's roughly about 13 weeks.
yeah, 13 weeks, right? So 13 weeks. So 400 by 13. Can you do the calc on that? 400 by 13. That's like roughly maybe like 70 pages, right? Can
400 by
somebody
13. It's coming to 31.
no 400 divided by the 13 1 3
Yeah, it's coming around 31.
31. You sure?
I'm projecting.
No, no, no. Just do the calculation. You have the screen open, right? Just
Yes, 400 divided by
She is
13.
doing the calculation on
okay,
our
okay, okay. Oh, I
calculator.
didn't see the screen. Okay, so 30 pages maybe. So each
Raghav,
each chapter how
Raghav,
many? Yeah.
I mean, I haven't skimmed through part 3 when it says word for word translation. So,
Hmm.
right now, what it is doing is probably sentence level translations. So, do
Hmm.
we need to put in so much time reading and again going through part 3? Can we not just
I don't
conclude our readings on till chapter 18?
I don't exactly know what part three contains actually. I
Can
haven't
we
looked
just
into it.
go to it
Word
once
for okay,
quickly?
okay. Yeah, let's do that. Let's see what does it say. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
we don't need it.
and how many pages is part three?
It starts from page where? Till 323 is the one which we'll read.
You
323.
can
So 323
go to
minus
the
93.
index.
323 minus 90, 231 divided by
13.
17 comes to 14. Yeah.
Divided by 13 though, not 17.
Okay. 231 divided by 13.
1 3, yeah.
So
So
18.
that is yeah, I mean, okay. That's so dumb. We
It
had to
is
make a calculation.
17, 13. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I think so. We each how many pages is each chapter?
I think that will vary. Uh,
Okay, let's do an average. Like divide the 231 divided by how many other chapters are pending. You'll get the number for each average number of pages per chapter.
Sorry, I didn't. Can you please pardon?
So number of chapters, right? How many chapters do we have left?
We have read one. We have 17 chapters.
So
Dear.
do that, like 231 divided by, I guess, like 17. I guess again you have 13, right? So yeah, I think we have to do one chapter per week. That would give us that number. But maybe we can do two chapters. I think two chapters would be good because see when I look at the things, right, it feels like there is not enough substance in each chapter for us to like have an entire discussion. I think a lot of the discussion that we had today was based on some of the things that we read in the previous sections outside of the chapter. Um, so I think two chapters per week is a good balance.
Um, Two chapters.
Hmm? So that means the 93 to when is the next chapter?
Let's say chapter 2 and
End of
chapter 3.
three. Yeah, end of chapter three. What is the page number on that?
134.
Okay, perfect. So we'll read until 134, 93 to 134. Yeah,
Yeah.
for the next session. Yeah.
I'll try my best. I am not very confident. I'll
No, it's
try.
see you maybe it looks daunting, but the thing is that you already read chapter two, right? You only have one more chapter to read. And the other thing is that each of these pages, like even though it's like those many pages, half of them are just like the actual Sanskrit text. So you don't have a lot that you have to go through. So I think you'll be surprised at how easy it is. Maybe you'll want to next time you'll come in and say, I want to go
Yeah,
three chapters.
the other books are very, exhausting, but this one is very concise, and it's
That
very
is why
easy to,
that is why one needs to put their own thoughts. Reading material is less, but thinking about them is
yeah.
more. Like Raghav thought about cyclic things. I didn't give, I just passed on through the pages, just read and left it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, we'll try to read the next two chapters, and I think there are the as we move forward, the contents become more and more dense, and depending
Mm.
on that, we might, even if we say like in the next meet, we might say we will read two chapters, but then we might end up only reading one because it is so detailed and
Yeah,
there is a
yeah.
lot to
Okay,
talk about it.
so then are we saying that for the next Sunday we are reading chapter 2 and 3, and based on our experience we'll see if we want to read chapter 4 or 4 and 5.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, something like that. But also, I have to let you guys know that I'm actually going to a conference, and I'm only coming back on Monday next week. So I'm not exactly sure like what my status is going to be on Sunday next week. I might try to join, but there is no guarantee. In case I'm not able to join, right? I will just let you guys get in the call and you can discuss. And
How about
Uh,
the previous day? When are you leaving for the conference? If we can have the
see,
meeting on Saturday
I'm
instead.
no, I'm leaving for the conference this Tuesday, and I'll only be back on Monday next week. So it's a big conference. It's a multi-day conference. Um, so yeah, it's gonna be. I'm not exactly sure where I'll be like on Sunday morning, because there are a bunch of things I have to do over there. I'm going to Kochi. This is one of the biggest startup conferences in India that's happening, and I'll be meeting a lot of people. I don't know if I'll be in the right state of mind to get on this even
Can
if I
we
had the
just
time. Yeah.
skip 1 week? We are such a small group there. Today,
Yeah.
if we see,
Sure,
we
we
are
can do
just
that.
3 people.
Yeah. Yeah, we can also consider that. But we'll try to like make sure that we're not skipping. But if it comes to that, like I'll let you guys know. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Anything else before we close?
Nothing else.
All right. Wonderful session, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed. Thanks for all
Yeah.
your valuable insights, Raghav,
Yeah.
Sandeep.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.